My name is Joe Antonelli. I was born in my fair city, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and immediately shipped off to Medford. Medford's my hometown. I currently live in Gainesville, Florida, having made the move in 1990. So I've been 20 years in Florida, but by no means is Florida my home. I mean, Massachusetts is where I was born and raised, and that's where I have my base. It's my roots. Not much can be said other than my days are a very Italian-American-based family life. Born and raised in Medford, 85% Italian-American. I knew early on that about at age 12, 13, there was something radically different about my likes of people, particularly people of my own gender. I didn't know quite how to make sense of it all. I never had experiences, but I knew I was really comfortable with the guys, with the kids, with my neighbors. And lo and behold, as I went into Medford High School, I became class president, voted most happy fella. There was loved by the sorority girls, sold shakers out of my locker, was very high-spirited, ran a favorite high school contest, which we won, beating Brockton High School, which was huge. Penny postcards, by the way, penny postcards. And over the years, I started to realize that my association with sports was tremendous, and I became 4 Letterman manager of 4 sports. Never participated because I had had a bad hip injury at age 14. I was incapacitated for almost a year out of school. But nonetheless, sports was a very strong base. I was a scorekeeper. I wrote sport columns for the Medford Daily Mercury. I helped with the American Legion post-45 baseball team. And I thoroughly enjoyed being where I was. And again, no experiences, but a very deep-rooted feeling of emotional connection. Fraternal, maybe, but male bonding, definitely. Never disliked anybody else, but just kind of liked the guys a little bit more. It wasn't until after I graduated high school, went into the people's place, known as Northeastern University. In those days, it was a $50 admission fee to sign in and $450 for the year, which is significantly different now. But I loved Northeastern. I did go back and forth every day, but I got associated early on with a fraternity. I pledged into a fraternity. I have always been the one who sought the road less traveled by, and I looked into an all-Jewish fraternity. I became the first Italian in the all-Jewish fraternity. I enjoyed it. I loved it. I also became the pledge master, better known as the warden. And the warden was in charge of the recruitment of young men. Who knew? You know, I had no knowledge of that whatsoever, but at that same time, that exact time, I met the first person who kind of went through the same thing I did in his hometown, in his world. Jewish kid, Elmer Morris Rosenbaum, Long Island. He was going to join the fraternity. And then there was Rick Seiler from Long Island, and he was about to join the fraternity. And there was another gentleman, and he was local to Boston. So there were a number of people joining at the same time who had similar experiences. But none of us had ever really come out. There was no such word as come out. We hadn't gone through a process of acceptance. We weren't sure exactly what we were accepting or rejecting. All we knew is that we had this like, this feeling that was very strong for our own gender. Well, Elmer and I talked one night in the house manager's room where I kept a twin bed pulled under his bunk, and I would stay overnight so I wouldn't have to travel back to Medford. And it grew into, well, what if, tell me about you. Well, what if, tell me about you. Well, what if I asked you if you wanted to do something, would you? And that went back and forth, and we played and toyed until we realized what it was, what we were, what we really liked, what we had, I guess, put under a mountain. But now the mountain had opened, and it was my fraternity life at Northeastern that made me come out and accept myself. Finally seeing kids from different regions and having something to connect to. having someone to compare my stories to. Well, the three of us, four of us, actually we became the fraternity boys as we went and we traveled downtown Boston together, away from the fraternity house, and discovered another world. It was the world that we had no knowledge of whatsoever, but it had been there, and it was there, and we sought it out. And our life in the Back Bay, Marlborough Street, changed dramatically every time we left that fraternity house with maybe some extra loaves of bread for newfound friends downtown who were living together in little apartments and waited for the fraternity boys to arrive. And so that began another whole chapter of what it was like to be out of one set of circumstances in a very suburban atmosphere, suddenly thrust into an urban atmosphere, and now suddenly realizing that all these things that I thought about were actually real. And there was a whole other world to open up. And that began another chapter. Let me just say that we're talking about a period of time which is the early 60s, having graduated the high school, Medford High School in 1961. We're talking a period of approximately the fall of 61 and on, early 1962. Well, Elmer, Rick, and I head downtown as the fraternity boys, and we started to discover a whole group of what were absolutely queens. That was the group. They were queens. They were called queens. The community was not referred to as a gay community. There was no pride involved whatsoever. It was very subterfuge. It was very apartment-driven. And there were many parties, but you always went to a party after you went clubbing, kind of under the guise that, were you going to be arrested? Was the party going to be busted? Because the rule of thumb then in Boston was that the gay bars, or lesbian bars, and there were only one or two of those, maybe a total of 6 or 7 that were active and very, very out. Each of them had police in the immediate vicinity. Most of them were owned or run by straight people, straight bartenders, straight bouncers, and with the idea that if there was anything out of line whatsoever, you might be subject to being taken outside and roughed up a little bit, beaten. If you were mouthy, if you were too queeny, if you tried to put on excessive clothing, materials, whatever. It was a very, very, almost a fearful existence in the middle of Boston that here I was from Medford, class president. What's this all about? I don't believe I'm in here. I don't even believe I'm here. But yet, it was very comfortable. There were some great people, and they were really different. They were wonderful people. Well, we became friends with them and started to go to apartments. You know, the apartments in those days were multicolored and hippie-like and just kind of bohemian. One apartment in the lower Back Bay, actually it was a lower hill, Brimfield Street, I think it was. All orange. The entire apartment's orange, including the grand piano. Everything was orange. And there was a mad head person, Patsy. Patsy, I can't remember, Patsy Guarini, a wonderful, wonderful soul from Mattapan. Patsy Guarini and the gang loved us, welcomed us as these kind of like little 3 straight boys, if you will, but we were gay, but we just weren't like they were. They were far more advanced into the carrying on than we had ever thought about being, because we have just emerged from the egg. And it was like, it was stunning to us. But using that group as a nucleus, they turned us on to all the parties. The Lawrence Streets, which was called Vaseline Alley, down in the south end behind the bars. But what astounded me most was that I was very, I guess, pro-patria. You know, I was very politically minded. I had been president of the Kennedy Youth Club in 1960, and I was all very average. But seeing police drag away people, seeing paddy wagons outside the club I was in, because we weren't allowed to touch, we weren't allowed to dance, we weren't allowed to show affection, We weren't allowed to kiss. We weren't allowed to do anything in a gay bar. This was a gay bar. Well, it didn't sound too happy to me. It wasn't very gay to me. It was very oppressive. But the parties were great. It was 62 private apartments. We're in the middle of Boston. Crowds of people would go out, just following the bars. Immediately after, and saying, like, where do we go? Who are we going with? Who's having a party? Where's the open house? And we would literally trail out around the Back Bay or the Beacon, Lower Beacon Hill or the South End and find these places and we'd literally go from place to place. And you'd stay wherever you thought you should or wherever it was real comfortable or before the cops would break up the party. Because association with homosexuals in those days were illegal. You couldn't gather. You couldn't be together in large groups. That was not going to happen on the watch of the Boston police. It was amazing. Every drag queen was always taken in those paddy wagons. That was the most amazing thing to me. Everybody who was really excessive was long gone. As soon as that bar closed, as soon as they walked out the door, the drag queens would be dragged right into open paddy wagons, and the bar crowd would line up almost from the doorway to the vanway. It was amazing. You had to be there to understand that these people were actually so proud and so, I guess, interested in being who they were that they would not qualify anything that they saw. You know, it was amazing. After they would take the drag queens in the cars, into the paddy wagons actually, they would just whip them around to Boston Police Headquarters, harass them, intimidate them, name-call them, demean them, and then release them. And they'd be back out on the streets, you know, in short order, kind of the hero and heroines of their moment. But it was a constant thing. And you always knew the police were around. And the unfortunate part about it was I was never used to police and I was never used to being in bars. And the bars then were not that numerous, but they were like pretty big and they've had some history. Sporters on the other side of Beacon Hill. Jacques right downtown was predominantly lesbian, but a mixed bar, but predominantly lesbian. The other side, more of a dance bar and a combination of drag shows and impersonators. Of course, the Punch Bowl, which was the name brand bar of the time. If you didn't go to the Punch Bowl, you weren't gay, you haven't been out, you haven't seen it. And the Punch Bowl actually was a cute bar, nice little bar, right behind the Park Plaza. And it was in the heart of town, but it had a couple of alleyways that were infamous. And those alleyways are where a lot of people got beaten up, just because. And that happened frequently. And on Sundays, you'd have a red shirt day, red party day. And you could go there on a Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock, kind of like a precursor to not just happy hours, but the tea dances. And it was, in effect, a tea dance because you were allowed in if you wore red and white. There was like a little trap door that they slid. You know, they looked out and they saw you. If they thought you belonged in, you came in. And you would stay there until about maybe 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And you could dance and do the things that you would normally not allowed to do at any other time at the same club. Sunday afternoons, red sweater parties, Punch Bowl. It was a trip. It was really quite good. Well, I remember some of the bars as being just a load of fun, even though they were fearful. And I just went maybe once or twice a week with my group, and we would always stick together. And we would come back and talk about it all the time. And just we're amazed that we were now in this subculture and we were getting involved with it. On the fraternity side, all that notwithstanding, I now used my new power. And I suddenly started to click with some of my fraternity brothers who were also, the 60s were a time of, I guess it was not just pursuit. It was a time of exploration, sexploration. Drug inducements, and things started coming around, marijuana, rock and roll, the Beatles. It was a very vibrant time, and it was just amazing. But I let that all work into a back-based state of mind, and I needed some money. I needed to do something. I had just gotten a small co-op job. I was the first co-op student from Northeastern to work the Massachusetts General hospital. I worked in the emergency ward. Had a wonderful time. Met a sailor there who was also a nursing student. And that was in my first clique. I stayed and decided to tell my mother back home in Medford I wasn't coming home on this particular Christmas weekend because I was working at the emergency ward. I was, but I was also working with the sailor, and we went back to the Beacon Hill, and I was discovering my soul and myself. It was a wonderful time. After a few months of that, I needed money, and I went working and I looked for a job close by, and there was this place called Ken's at Copley. Ken's at Copley was very unique because it brought the big city of New York into Boston. It was a New York-style Jewish deli. That was kind of like, oh, wow, New York. So, albeit that sounded good, I decided to try to get a job. I got a job part-time as a host. I ended up being there 9 years. But it was a remarkable period because Ken's was the middle of the spoke of Boston's social activity in the Back Bay in the 60s. It was run by two Jewish brother-in-laws, Ken Rosenfield and George Gorberg. And they were pretty open-minded, pretty progressive for their time, didn't want their place to be a trouble to anyone. They welcomed people. They were pretty accepting. What we had there was almost 3,000 people a day would come through Ken's at Copley. It was open 22 and a half hours a day. It closed at 3 a.m. It reopened at 6:30 a.m. After we clean, back open. And they were 7 days a week. It was just the place to be. Fabulous bakery, beautiful deli, 3 rooms. I ran the hosting of the front door, and I had friends from within who I later realized, almost quickly realized, these women are a partnership. They became 2 of my best friends, Alice and Kay. One was the manager. She was a tyrant. She ran that place. My goodness, she was a little Armenian lady, about 5'3", but you would not cross Alice. She ran it like a clock. Her partner, Kay, Italian-American, Irish, upstairs, second floor, head waitress. Joe, little Joe, front door. And I'm kind of like, that was my first experience in maybe doing HR, little human resources, you know. I'm out there, and my job was to seat people where I thought they should be seated, where I thought they belonged within the context of 3 rooms. We had everybody in Boston that could be there, including lots and lots of gay and lesbian people. The word bisexual, the word transgendered, or transvestite were hardly ever used. It was like we were the queers. It was about the fags, the queers, the dykes. That was about it. That was about the nicest that would be verbalized. But my job made it possible for me, and this is really what happened. We developed the first gay and lesbian seating area in any restaurant, exclusive, if we could make it exclusive, to us and our community. How did we do that? I read people. I kind of looked at people and read them. Would go down the very long line that would form all the time. That line went straight out by the deli, outside past the Irish cop, and into Boylston Street on a far turn. When the bars closed, the place was packed. My job was to pick and choose who goes where, and I would go down that line and see 3 or 4 women together and say, party of 4, please, around to the left and upstairs. And you see 2 guys, gentlemen, this way, please, 2, around the left, upstairs. I'd see a party of 7 that looked a little bit touch and go, more touch than go. Party of 6, please, large round, around to the left and upstairs. While we developed a absolute seating area. And then we would, splinter in student groups and couples and whatever. My friend Kay made a killing because gay people were not only no trouble, there was never any problems upstairs. They tipped well, they loved being there, and they had their own space and place to play on the 2nd floor of this wonderful New York-style deli. Downstairs, the front room would be a combination of pimps and whores, coffee shop people, Jewish comedians, a la Rodney Dangerfield being one of them. Second room is Emerson College, BU, couples, all in their little deuces, and that would be the incorporation of people like the Fonzie. He was there. There would be these large round tables that had sight lines to everywhere in the place. That was for the mafia. The mafia came in regularly and took their table. If somebody was in the table, they would tell us, please clear the table, move the table, we want our table. That happened. That was a truism. Sometimes you would actually see this group of men on one round, and then Judy Garland and her party on the other table. Connie Francis upstairs having an argument in Italian to her parents, and I'm sitting there saying, I can't believe I'm doing this. But we created this wonderful scene. But being gay then was just, a wonderful special discovery. Well, I stayed on well after everything exploded in Boston, and Boston did explode. Obviously, it started with JFK's assassination, and which was a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. But as gay people, we had a small community, and we knew it. And where I lived in the Back Bay, I now moved into town and took my first little one-bedroom apartment right above a laundromat, 247 Newbury Street. Across the street was Daisy Buchanan's, owned by a hockey player, Derek Sanderson from the Bruins. And this little laundromat drew people, and it was a perfect place to just kind of hang right across the street from the sub shop and out the door, and I'm on the third floor. The first floor easily was a very accessible place, and had a crazy man who was our owner of the building, Mr. What was his name? I can't remember, but wonderful person. Upstairs on the third and fourth floor, running a dance studio. Well, lo and behold, my little apartment became a holding area for Ken's at Copley, because one of my functions at Ken's was, Joe, these are all USO people. They come here every day, and they need work. The ship has just come in. Those are famous words in the gay community amongst the men. The ship has just come in. So that meant that downtown at night would be wild. There'd be thousands of sailors debarking off of Charlestown Navy Yard or the Boston Navy Yard, and the combat zone would be wild that next few days. But they needed work. The USO would come in, and I, of course, I thought I had rather good taste, and I would pick who I thought would fit. And those young men would work with us and work real hard. And after 12 hours with me and the gang and Ken's, we're exhausted. It's 3:30 in the morning. It's time to party. And we would go around the corner to Newbury Street and come to my place, and we would have another chapter there until early morning. It was a period, like we're talking, the 60s. This whole period of Ken's, it had a heyday. And we're talking around 62-ish that I got involved, and I stayed on with it until after I had a very bad car accident in 1968. I stayed on about another year. So we're talking that whole decade, and the 60s were volatile. Boston and Cambridge were the center on the East Coast, as was Berkeley and San Francisco on the West Coast. And the Vietnam War was not only begun, but expanded. All of that was happening. We had everything from civil rights to anti-war to now even ERA beginning. All of those things were happening at one time, and the gay community was not really organized as a gay community specifically. They were part of progressive people. They would support civil rights. They would support ERA. They'd be supportive of anti-war. But they weren't strictly a gay thing. That didn't even occur. Ken's gave us a kind of a unit. It was kind of like a cotton candy. You could just focus and just get swept up by this number of people. Where I was living, Back Bay, it's about 15 square blocks. Runs from Arlington to Mass Ave, from Boylston Street to Beacon Street. The estimated gay and lesbian population in those days was about 10 to 12,000. A lot of people. So it was there. We were there. We were in the middle of all this, but they weren't organized. There was no political, organized scenario. And of course, naturally, there was no computers and no gay press and no Twitter and Tweeter and all the rest. There was none of that. It was about a subculture. It was about going out and meeting. It was about private parties. That's what it was about. And those were great. We had a wonderful time, but oppressive. You couldn't be who you were. You always thought about the policeman. You couldn't go to the Esplanade because you were always afraid of other people coming down there and harassing you. The Back Bay was my PlayStation, where I was from. I was from Medford, but now I'm Back Bay. Esplanade was my backyard. Ken's was my kitchen. I ate there every day. You know, I really know how to eat a wonderful Reuben and a Blintz right now. It's a good thing. It's always stayed with me. And that plus my Jewish fraternity, I probably should have put a yarmulke on. It would have been a lot easier for me. But notwithstanding, our gay life became a very active life. We knew exactly who we were then. We knew that we were powerful, more powerful than we ever thought we were, because we had this view of them and us. We know a little bit more of what's going on here. We're open-minded to a little bit more here. So we really became very, very involved, politically involved. We started to get involved with things that were starting at the Charles Street Meeting House in the Lower Hill. And there would be coffee shops. That would be the extent, really. Coffee shops and discussions and little book and poetry and things of that sort. There were no, gay clubs and youth groups at Northeastern or BU or BC or Harvard. None of that existed. None of that would be allowed to exist. So when I think back and I look at Massachusetts now and today, I just think, my God, where we have come from. And people must understand where we have been. We were really at the beginning, after the 50s, from the Mattachine and the Daughters of Bilitis and all that. The 60s were volatile because it exploded all of us into knowing that we were part of a much bigger nation. The gay nation. We were much bigger than we ever thought of it being. No discussion in the 60s can be complete without the idea of what Boston was like during the Reign of Terror, which is what I called it, after the assassinations of John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. There were just so many severe emotional setbacks that everything you started to think that you were fighting for and people you knew to be supportive or people that you were hoping would come to a community's beginning. The war in Vietnam was huge, and we would put together 100,000, 150,000 people, and there were tens of thousands of gay and lesbian people that came onto the anti-war movement. Obviously, our tipping point, even for Boston, was the Stonewall riots, June of 69. And that became a rallying cry. And it became a place where people would meet and talk about things, and the need to organize, and the need to survive, and the need to put things together. And that was about the time when people were starting to see the beginnings of gay press, and the beginnings of little tabloids and mimeograph newsletters, and the word going out. It wasn't until the early 70s that we really started to organize and get on the street and decide that it was a little bit bigger and more than we thought it was going to be. And we were picking up a lot of personal pride, and we knew that we had a huge community. At least we knew in Boston we did. We knew we spoke for many, many millions in the closet, which was a whole different story, another whole chapter of gay lesbian movement. But as far as Boston and Cambridge and Greater Boston, people started to talk about us. People started to reference us and to say that we had to be acknowledged. There would have to be a reason to give us protections under law, because we've been living really as second-rate citizens in a class act city, as was the rest of the country. And that's when we got our first elected officials, albeit that they weren't out, Barney Frank, etc. Promises of new gay and lesbian legislation to be the hope that there would be something brought up to the State House, finally. The thoughts that we could really look and zero in on a person or a place or an activity, and we could grow and prosper. I think, being in that middle of all of that was just such a huge bridge building thing. It was amazing because we knew that we were from backgrounds, local, suburban, average backgrounds, but that we now represented this entire new community of people, a whole new, literally millions of people in the country. Because, the statistics always said 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6, maybe 1 out of 10, 1 out of 2. Whatever the number was, it was real and it was effective to tell us we needed to do organized politics. It is something that has always been with me ever since. We were making major strides. We have made it to a degree where we've organized ourselves. We have committees and groups. We have people putting in legislation. We're fighting the church, basically. We're fighting the Catholic Church and other major groups. But in Massachusetts, it was really the Catholic Church that became a great opposer to what we were standing for. After 17 years of fighting the church, you know the history. We retained our political civil rights. In the early 70s, we had already started to formulate the gatherings after Stonewall, which was in '69. Locally, one of our local politicians that we still know to this very day, a Barney Frank, came forward and promised on a platform to run and to, once elected, add a Massachusetts first gay and lesbian civil rights legislation. It was a major first. That was 1972. Within a year, we have now an openly lesbian candidate, Elaine Noble, elected as a state representative. But it wasn't until after Barney put that legislation through, it was 17 years of fighting really all the opponents, particularly the church, until we saw it come to fruition and pass. It was 1989 at that time. We had signed the bill. We had all formed at Faneuil Hall. I remember Faneuil Hall. I remember this wonderful piece that we all signed off on, that we had made history in this magnificent building. It has been a long time coming, but it was a mere fact of perseverance. We had had now a gay community newspaper, the Sojourner, periodicals and publications are there in their place. Ken's decides to close after becoming unionized. He had always threatened to close if unionized, and he did. That was the late 70s. But it was like an end of an era. We couldn't believe it. It was like losing Nathan's in New York City. It was just an amazing loss as far as a place to go. And people, obviously we find our way and water trickles in different directions. But that was a closed chapter. I myself, living in the Back Bay, and had a wonderful stint on Newbury Street, and now I have moved. I've gone to Salem, Massachusetts. The Witch came into Salem, Massachusetts, the Witch City, with a great history, but a different feeling. It was in Boston. It was a wonderful time to come in. Historically, I'm a history buff. I moved up and I rented a 7-room flat. It was an apartment attached to one of the fabulous brownstones on Chestnut Street. That boulevard-wide, architecturally beautiful street in Salem. Sea captains' homes. And I got the back end of one, and I think it was $355 a month, which was stunning as far as a rent. But with that in mind, here I am now on a wonderful street. I'm in a great historic city. What am I going to do? An offer and an opportunity became available for the Salem marketplace to establish itself. Open market stalls, previously a farmer's market that really didn't go. They offered people an opportunity to build little buildings, enclose them, start a business, and they would give you this differential for 5 years. Well, I did that. I opened up Town Hall Antiques and Collectibles. I became active in the Salem Chamber of Commerce. I was on the board of directors there. I started off with my own shop, being in the center, and that kind of built me into being referred to by many people, because for whatever reason, as the mayor of the marketplace. And I had a wonderful time. Around the corner, we used to be Tierney, Kalis, and Adamopoulos, very dear friends who were attorneys right around the corner. And I remember folks coming through and, different politicians coming through, but of course the community came through. We would have summer ethnic festivals. I would meet lots of people, and I was out. And I had a political slogan board. It was like a church hymnal board in front of my building. And I would put my feelings on that, and I would change it out all the time. And I was rather open and very outspoken. But I drew people in. I had wonderful posters and all community events on a community bulletin board that included gay and lesbian issues, or alternative issues, things you wouldn't find at the Chamber of Commerce office, but you would find at Joe's little visit information center. That drew people in. Self-included, get involved with the North Shore Gay Alliance, which then picks up the North Shore Gay and Lesbian Alliance as a name, to be perfectly honest. We thought it was a wise decision to incorporate the L word, which was wonderful. And that group, started off with about 6 or 7 people in that area and grew to be a very important social organization, not just for gay and lesbians, but for political motivation. We even ran candidates' nights at the local Salem Evening News. We even affected a mayoral race, actually with Monahan from Beverly. It was a very interesting time. We made history left and right. Our first dances, first alcohol being served in all gay and lesbian events in Salem, the old town hall, events that would bring the Boston Gay Men's Chorus out of Boston. For the very first time, they actually traveled out of Boston, and they came to the old town hall in Salem, and it was a wonderful, wonderful night. Not to mention all the things we did to stir it up on the North Shore, albeit from the Audubon bird walks and trails to the Isle of Shoals of the coast of New Hampshire, to a series of winter brunches and restaurants throughout the North Shore, Marblehead, etc., Peabody, Ipswich. We had a wonderful organization of people. There were new clubs. There were new places to go, even fantasies. I remember on Route 1 in Ipswich being a very big club, local to the North Shore. There was, of course, Fran's Place, which still is here today, I think, as that. By 83, we're 5 years old. We have this wonderful 5th anniversary party. The old town hall, my name of my shop, Town Hall Antiques and Collectibles. We're going to go to the old town hall. Well, I decided that we need to go because second floor has a beautiful old dance floor and a place where a great party could be held. What better place for gay and lesbian people, in my mind, in Salem, but Old Town Hall, from the guy who runs Town Hall Antiques? One problem. We need a permit, and the permit has to be had through the city council, which means that somebody has to go to city council and effectively lobby for a gay and lesbian dance, which is not exactly something they were used to here in Salem, with liquor. Well, I'm much around because of my involvement with the Chamber of Commerce and my involvement with events on the marketplace and that whole attitude of people knowing it really sailed through. It really happened. And we got our permit. NSGLA had a fabulous 5th anniversary. We invited a local politician in, Joe Antonelli. We had people established who in the community who came. We had over 140 people show up. It was a blast. It was a dance. It was a great time. It was history in the making. NSGLA made history. I mean, all through its existence. Gay History Week at Salem State College, bringing in people from, all sorts of areas outside of us. A wonderful, wonderful thing. NSGLA made a difference. We would go into various parts in what was really a very, very white, very Republican, very conservative North Shore. And we would go into these small towns and go to these little wonderful salt box restaurants and have winter brunches with 30 or 40 people. And we would show them the face of the gay and lesbian community. And it made a difference. It makes a difference. And we went beyond that. I mean, we did political things, and we had letter writings, and we had a lot of wonderful established events. We had an annual gathering, usually at a Unitarian church, either in Danvers or in Marblehead, and with a fabulous auction. We'd raise $5,000 or $6,000 on a particular afternoon, have wonderful food, several hundred people, decorated in rainbow colors, and there we were in Marblehead or Danversport or Ipswich or wherever we were. It made a difference. Even holding candidates' nights, it made a difference. And that was all part of the coalition of gay and lesbian people in Massachusetts. There were other places doing things, Northampton, of course, Provincetown, of course. But we were special, I thought, because we affected an area that people considered to be untouchable. The Cabots and the Lodges and the NSGLA. It was really wonderful. So we, again, we made history. It was the 80s. We're moving into Salem is a more progressive city because of it. I can't say that Salem has been any better off than it was then than it is today. I don't know local Salem today, but it couldn't have been any better after we established the fun we had and the solidarity that we built. It was really quite cool. You had to see us showing up at Barnegat Transportation at Pickering Wharf for a disco/dance gathering out at Salem Harbor, Marblehead Cove, swinging through up to the North Shore. Magnificent. A wonderful time. Merrimack River. I remember going to the Merrimack River in Lowell, Lawrence, and going down the river, dancing ourselves off the music, bouncing off the textile mills. And there we have about 50 or 60 people and great food. And I'm sure they never saw quite a little flotilla as they did that night in downtown Lowell. All told, I can't say enough about NSGLA. I think the NSGLA ended in, I believe, 1998. That was brought back into a archival. We've done it. We did it. We move on. But it was a great 20-year stint. It was a great 20-year success story of a local organizing effort to bring people together. And Lord knows how many people met each other and became partners and have lived with each other since because of the establishment of that particular group locally in Salem. That's all I can really say. I think there was a great time for Salem. I think Salem had a wonderful effect on all of us, and we had a wonderful effect on it. With all the social activities, that was obviously the premise by which we began. But because of it, we were inspired by the political activity that was going on in general. We were active locally. We ran candidates' nights locally at the Salem Fives and Savings Bank. We knew we didn't want to be just a social group, so we never became a 501c3 because we wanted to be politically minded. We wanted to have an effect on the people that we were involved with. We had the candidates' nights. They had an effect on local elections. We would organize ourselves every year and tie into the Boston community, the greater Boston community. We were very active. As a group, people knew the NSGLA. They knew that we existed. They had good words for us. We had a very good reputation. Every year we would have our group of people, whatever it may be, 20, 30 people, 40 people, whatever it was, that would doll up, put on the lavender, put out the rainbow flags, and we're off to the Boston Pride marches every year. Always had a contingent from the North Shore. Very, very important that we be there. We were there. We were there for all those who couldn't be there. And it was a very strong face. And it was very important for people to recognize that not only we weren't just being courageous, we were being proud, but we were being courageous for those who yet haven't reached that level. And they would soon be. After that, we would go from there into what would be the national marches. 1979, National March in Washington. Again in 1987, an even larger March on Washington. NSGLA was there. amongst a huge contingent from Massachusetts, the North Shore, Salem area, Greater Salem. We were there in our presence. We had our wonderful spots in hotel rooms, wherever we could find them, but we participated. We were there in the middle of all the marches when the AIDS quilt went down in the 80s. There were just things that we were a major part of. We didn't miss a trick. We had great leadership, I will admit. We had great local people, and that was really the power behind it. The rule of the few is so important, that a few good people could stimulate a lot larger. I've always referred to us as, the community of being under the iceberg, where it took a few people on the top to really stimulate the bottom. And that's the nature of the beast. So it only took a few wonderful people. It wasn't, that we controlled it. We just organized it. And we were open, and people came to us. And that has made a significant difference. People don't understand that there are different parts of the state of Massachusetts that never had something similar to an NSGLA. And they were, to this very day, they wish they had. And we did. And that is history in its making. That is history that connects a dot. Just all the things that we can say about how proud we are to be from the North Shore, how proud we are to be gay and lesbian citizens, of value, of worth. We know that, and we were participatory. We have made a difference. And in that difference, it has made life better for all the people around us. And that is the story yet untold. And with all the advances that Massachusetts has made, this is only one brick in the walkway. NSGLA, Salem, North Shore, Boston, Massachusetts, Washington. It will effectively mean the change that we know must come. And that's what we're working for. And it's been a wonderful ride. It's been a wonderful story. Not all pleasant. A lot of negativity, a lot of animosity, and things that I never would have anticipated. As the little Italian American out of South Medford, I would never have anticipated having to deal with issues that were negative as badly as I had to. But personally, I've been enriched. Personally, I couldn't feel better about myself and the people that I've dealt with and the impact we have had. It's a footprint. So have we left a good footprint? I hope so. And I know that we have meant to be very, very solid for everybody in this country. That's the history. That's what I can stand for. I can, certainly tell you little stories and little vignettes that may be good or bad, but we all have story. And ours is a good one here in Massachusetts, and one I'm very, very proud of. Salem has been a wonderful place to be out of. And having come to Salem, I have to say this, having come to Salem, it brought me out, even more so from being in Boston and Back Bay. Salem made me emerge as more of a voice. Not necessarily a leader, but my own personal leader. I felt good about me enough to tell people. People knew of me. They knew I was out. They knew I was gay. They connected me to it. I wasn't just gay. I was Joe, and I was gay. There was a difference. And it's so important to be proud, to be comfortable, to be who you are. And I couldn't tell that to more people. Just take a deep breath, simply breathe, get out there, make a difference, do it, because we all are here for one reason, to enjoy our existence. My move from the North Shore originally, from 1989-90, I ended up in Florida, albeit that it was a change I was really not wanting to make, but I knew I needed to make a change. I had lost a lot of people, a lot of friends, and I lost my mother and father, and there was no lover involved, so it was time for a major change. Went to Gainesville, Florida, university town, similar to an Amherst or a Madison or a Lincoln or an Austin, progressive. I call it a bagel hole of blue, surrounded by a ghetto of conservatives. So I've established myself there, saw a great, great need, using the word alliance from the NSGLA, developed the Gainesville Community Alliance back in 1991. It's now 18 years old. I have been its acting president ever since. And we've made history in Gainesville and helped participate in furthering what is LGBT rights and privileges and equality under law. I couldn't be more proud of being from Massachusetts. Living in Florida, believe me, I tell you, I'm 30 years behind. Living in Massachusetts, you've come so far, we've come so far. I'm so proud of the work we've done and the establishment of all the laws for protection, the equal treatment of human beings. It is massive. When people tell me in Florida we aren't making any advance, we're not doing enough, I always go back to the beginning days and saying, you have no idea from whence we came. And the fact is, we've done tremendously. We have lots of work to do, and we will continue until it is done.